The Media Project. With fast-moving and sweeping changes to our economy in the works, we all need to reconsider how our investments are best placed. At Partners in Housing, we believe your money is best placed locally. Utilized to increase value and provide stable and desirable housing to your neighbors. Contact Partners in Housing to find out how you can participate in local housing opportunities by joining the Partners in Housing Fund. Look us up at partnersinhousingvt.com or email us at partnersinhousingvt@gmail.com.
Good evening, all my Are We Here Yet fans out in podcast land. Your host here, Scott M. Graves, for another summer 2025 edition of the Are We Here Yet podcast. With me tonight in the virtual studio, I have with us the Vice President of 1Berkshire from the beautiful Berkshire Hills of Western Massachusetts, as far west, in fact, as you can go in the Commonwealth and not be in New York or Vermont or any other place. I have Vice President Ben Lamb. Ben, how are you?
See you. Good, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad that you are here. Just a little sidebar here to begin. We'll begin with a sidebar. Born and raised in where I currently reside, outside of Massachusetts, Rutland, Vermont.
So we have deep family roots. Heartland, Vermont is our heritage land up there in the Northeast Kingdom, and then ended up being raised in upstate New York, but Vermont is where my roots are. Always will be.
Very cool. Very cool. And of course, it's funny when I got here, and we'll talk a little bit about this. We'll go on to some other more prescient things about economic development, but I will mention sort of as a preface to that. What's interesting here is you get a real sense of physical connection to the Berkshires because, to my east, to my right, my left is the Greens if I'm facing south. To my right are the Taconics, and they're really like the little kid Taconics, the big kid south of that range, which really matures by the time you get down the end of Bennington County and then into the Berkshires. And it's it gives us a sense of like connection, I feel.
Well, it's the same mountain range. We often joke that in the Berkshires we're basically southern Vermont geologically. So and sociopolitically usually as well. So
it's for southern Vermont, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So all the rage these days when we are talking on this show focused on the economic side is what are you doing out there for the next what does the next 24 to 48 months look like? With all of the drastic changes that have come really fast in public funding for a whole host of economic development initiatives, what does that look like in your world?
Yeah, it's a great question. And often the question more so is, what are you going to do in the next 24 to 48 hours? And that's, it's anybody's guess on a given day. But I think, one thing that we've become really attuned to is the necessity of moderating ourselves to be responsive and not reactive. So it's, yes, we are absorbing a ton of information and a ton of updates and a lot of shifting tectonic issues and challenges and opportunities, right? Like it all sort of comes in a mixed bag with all the things that are going on. So, for a lot of what we do is, we're dealing with a huge membership, right? So we have around 700 member businesses. We have 32 cities and towns that we serve, 128,000 people region-wide. So there's a big responsibility in terms of making sure that we're not acting in a way that could actually escalate issues in a way that we don't necessarily want, but also not ignoring things as they're coming through. So at least building out a plan. So for us, a lot of it has been diversifying revenue streams to ensure that programs can persist, right? as you see, federal dollars kind of start to dwindle, you start to then see state dollars react to that as well. And so it's really figuring out what are those new revenue streams that maybe had just been a creative concept prior, but now actually have the motivation to be acted upon and actually leveraged as an opportunity to really put on our entrepreneurial caps. We help all these businesses grow or start, grow, thrive, sustain, transition. And it's really a time that we've started to put on that same hat and, doing what we tell others to do in many ways, and putting that into action. So it's,
yes. More specifically, does that look like more like making a transition from where you have federal dollars into ensuring that there's state dollars there? And then I'd like to explore, how exactly that happens, how the decisions are made. Or is it more like somehow we have to rely more on revenue or some other form that private capital comes into the organization so it can be dispersed? Which to me, knowing, and this doesn't mean that I know everything about what 1Berkshire is doing, but understanding the work that you're doing, connecting and capacity building with businesses, with corporations and other organized entities of different kinds, that seems more problematic to me when you start to try to fund that with private capital, but maybe not. And that's why I ask.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you'd be surprised by people, right? Like I think that the reality is that we've been surprised in a positive way many times when things looked fairly bleak. So just a little bit of structure, right? We've only fairly recently actually been a recipient of federal grants. For about 2 years now, we've tapped into some USDA funding to provide technical assistance for, a spectrum of businesses that, have been distressed over time and really need that support. And that's been really valuable because it's been able to escalate our work that we were doing with some EDA funding prior, or elevate it rather. On the state funding side, we, as an organization, we're not a government entity, but we are written into legislation. So we are the Regional Economic Development Organization, and I think there's 12 of those written into the legislation. And then we're also the Regional Marketing and Tourism Organization, or Regional Tourism Council. And both of those streams actually have some competitive grant awards that we can apply for through the state once the state budget is set. And so that's always been, as long as I've been around and even before, those have been our primary state dollars that we've been able to access, sometimes an earmark here or there for a special project. I think what we've seen kind of quickly with the federal government is it's not that it's gone, but it's on a lag. Like there's certainly a delay in some of those streams. We don't know what that's going to look like. We're very hopeful that awards will be made based on applications submitted, back in February and March. And we're hoping that they see that there is a deep value in providing technical assistance to small businesses everywhere, not just in rural places, but everywhere. And so we continue to keep our ear to the ground on that, but hoping for the best. On the state side, there are very real challenges. Like we have seen some immediate action taken at the state level, which now we are in an advocacy mode, right? It's not very often that we have to really put on an advocacy hat for those resources because they have been written into legislation. But this year we have to, because it looks like a decent chunk of that is being kind of eliminated from the available resource pool. So, really helping to pull together our legislators, representatives, senators, and folks in leadership to see that there is a true value for that $210,000 that we got in FY25. We calculated approximately a $50 million economic impact in Berkshire County. You don't really beat those types of returns, right? Like that's sort of as good as it gets. So that's on the public dollar side, but really we are a membership-based organization. We have that 700 member plus group, and we've seen an immense return on members just going into the new fiscal year. It's actually been really exciting to see what our membership team has experienced, with members jumping right back in as the new year has rolled over in the beginning of July. I mean, we're a few weeks in now, and we're already seeing really strong percentages of returning members and a lot of new members coming in. And those dollars do allow us to do much of the work that we do on the economic development side in particular. So, again, it's a nice surprise when we see that there is still that appetite for folks to participate in something bigger than themselves. And they recognize that the resources that we provide to an emerging entrepreneur or someone that's trying to transition is, worth their investment because it's part of a bigger ecosystem. But we are thinking about how do we dig deeper into that? How do we create some new programs? We've created a number of new opportunities that have sponsorship ability, opportunities with them, or may actually be very much so a pay-for service that we can offer, not even just locally, but actually at a national scale. And those things have a runway to getting them up and going. And so there's that kind of time lag between now and then. But we're getting really creative and, really thinking outside the box of how we've operated in the past and how our peers operate, because we know during unprecedented times, you have to take unprecedented creative actions. And so we're really in that mode right now.
Yeah. And in hearing you over the years speak, including on different other podcasts, I've gotten the impression that the idea of the bottom up approach kind of resonates with you. Mm-hmm. That's some of this more recent fun programming that you guys have developed has been, and I mean this specifically to the idea of growing businesses, whether growing existing businesses or helping people spark new ones, as opposed to the I guess we'll call it a mainstream idea of we can poach industry from afar from somewhere else, which particularly in rural places seldom ever works. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't really bring what people think it's going to bring, right? Is that true, or
I think it ultimately depends. I certainly have had experiences on both sides of that case. And I think elements of it have to do with, when you bring a large industry in and the workforce and the skill development hasn't been in place to support such an industry just kind of blopping itself into a rural community, it's really hard to get up to speed. But then it is also very hard to retain those staff because it's an unfamiliar space. And if you're not bringing in new workforce from outside the area in, and we have a workforce or a housing crisis here, which makes it really hard to do that right now. That all sort of culminates in challenges that I think that the larger employers that come in feel very intimately. And so you might get them in and then they sort of start to winnow away. In other cases, they come in and they really carve out a home. In Berkshire County, an organization or a business with 50 people, that's a pretty big business here, right? That's a big percentage of the workforce right there.
What's your total population? So the 35 towns are the entirety of the county, correct?
Yep. So it's 32 cities and towns, 2 cities, and the rest are towns. Those range in population from about 250 people in like Mount Washington to 44,000 in Pittsfield, which is the largest city in our region. So we have 128,000, give or take, based on the last census, which, it's nice to see that for the last 40 years now, we've seen population decline in Berkshire County, and it's still declining. Not to say that we're out of the woods yet, but we're seeing the bottom plateau a little bit on our population, which means that there are definitely people coming in. Because as, biological attrition occurs and people pass and such, you would see that line continue to dive if it weren't for more people coming into the region. So there are some positives that we see on the horizon.
I mean, you had a depopulation, especially of a lot of hill towns where agriculture was marginal to begin with. And that really starts all the way back to like the 1870s. And it just continues to the first third or more of the 20th century. But what's bringing people back, do you think?
There's many different reasons. We did see a pretty solid influx during the pandemic. I think a lot of people were looking to escape major metro areas and they were looking for a place with space. They got plenty of that, but still within a drive radius. One of the interesting things about Berkshire County is that from where I'm sitting right now in North Adams, there's 24 million people within a 2-hour drive radius of us.
That's right.
That's a huge number of people, especially when you consider that it's only about half that number if you're sitting in the middle of Boston. So their drive market is much smaller in terms of population. So there is a lot of access points here. And I think that people recognize that they can live, play, work, everything in the Berkshires, and they still have access to that very big network of people in metropolitan areas that they can get to in a couple hours or 3 hours or whatever the case might be. So that's a big piece of it. I also think that when people discover the Berkshires and kind of the arts, the culture, the outdoor recreation, the quality of life assets that we carry in our back pocket at all times. I mean, many people come here to summer in the Berkshires, right? It's their resort location. It's where they go to vacation and we get to live here. And generally speaking, the cost of living is not astronomically high for folks that live here. And the quality that we have within our day-to-day is very high. So I think when folks have found that either in passing, they came to visit a museum or they visited a friend or they went to a summer camp here and just had really fun memories, and then they kind of yo-yo back into the ecosystem, that's a really big piece of it. It's a lot of those folks that had some point of connectivity either when they were a kid or otherwise that just there was a draw, right? There's something about the Berkshires that it sort of like hooks you. Like I'm not from here, right? And I came to college here, and I immediately started calling this place home, like within 2 weeks of being at college here, and that never went away. It just has a vibe to it that really does make it.
It has the culture of a mountain place, and that is very, it's appealing. It you can call it attractive. It's it is. I don't want to. I'm not here to say, oh, it's just like Vermont, because there are
similarities, but yeah.
I mean, look, there are two different jurisdictions because we decided, Vermont's going to be Vermont and Massachusetts is Massachusetts. But there is a mountain culture. This is one of my sort of cultural and economic arguments to make for, hey, we should create more opportunity across those borders, right? The state borders really mean very little when we talk about northwestern Connecticut, the eastern side of the Hudson Valley, the Western Mass and Vermont, all the way to Quebec. There's like a shared culture there. And there's already a lot of commerce that happens just because of proximity. But is there a way to actually optimize that in a way, make it that much more, a larger capacity, so much so that people from afar want to be a part of that. They want to do business there,
Well, and I think rural in New England is very different from rural in other parts of the United States, right? Like we are not like
it, right? I mean, middle of Nebraska, 24 million people wherever you are.
Exactly. If you threw me in the middle of Nebraska, it's going to take me a much further distance to get to 24 million people, right? So even though we have all those qualities and qualifications of being rural and just the essence of what that is, we also have a very strong innovation and tech economy. So, when we think about these were the old historic mill towns that, yes, there was an economic trauma that occurred 40 years ago where a lot of industry offshored. But what we saw, instead of it just disappearing forever, we saw it go dispersed, right? We still have a lot of skunk works that spun off from those big employers that have continued to sustain. We have a big, technical mold company, like when it comes to plastics and that type of injection process. We have General Dynamics mission systems. We've got health and human services technology companies. We've got these emergent aerospace industries that are bubbling up and really setting the stage for what could be, the industry set that carries us ahead another 100 years. So that, I think, is another aspect of the draw where, yeah, sure, you can come here for the space and the outdoors and all that stuff, but you can also come here with a really creative, innovative tech concept. You can get pinned down at the Berkshire Innovation Center and become accelerated and incubated there. You can get connection to state resources to actually foster that thing into something really meaningful and become, the next brilliant idea out there on the market changing the world. And we're actually seeing that happen in real time. So it's not even that I'm making that up. It's that we are seeing those cases being made. And now it's a matter of getting that narrative out onto the street more. Because that is one space where we still see a big gap where rural still has the narrative of farms and woods. And, you don't see a person for a mile and a half on any given day. That's not really the case. And I think the lived reality of rural Massachusetts and the Berkshires is a much more exciting and inspiring, even in the day-to-day work that we do, than a lot of people give it credit.
Yeah, that's right. You've mentioned that aspect of rurality. You've also mentioned twice housing and how that plays. There's this interesting under the most of it is happening under the radar conversation in Massachusetts. I'm experiencing myself there too, and doing development work in Franklin County, just to your east.
Our neighbors.
So there are those that would say, why concentrate a lot of effort, whether it's in funding a lot of housing or other types of economic development funding. It seems inefficient that we would place that funding in the western part of the state. Why don't we concentrate our efforts where most of the population is, in the eastern part of the state? And it's interesting, if we understand the history of the state, it's actually not the first time that people have said this, right? This bubbles up every couple of generations. So much so that, the state senator, Joe Comerford, within the last year, actually wrote about it, in the Boston Globe. It was either the Globe or the State Senate newsletter.
Oh yeah, maybe it was News.
saying, here's all the actual reasons why we really do need to invest in the western part of the state. I'm sure you're familiar with this dialogue. What do you make of all of this? How do you counter it? Or really, I mean, do you even feel like it's really, something that's worth even talking about? You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah. I don't mean to laugh at that last.
Is it just the blabber of Easterners, Ben Lamb?
Driven by data. Driven by technology. Driven by community development. Driven by the need to get results for your project. SM Graves Associates. Delivering real estate development to you, including project management and pre-development services with a keen focus on delivering community-oriented projects. We build profitable projects that respond to the needs of your neighborhood. Join the SMG family. Find us at smgravesassociates.com.
It's interesting. So I have a lot of friends that, I graduated college with. We went to school here in North Adams, right? And I graduated with them, and they moved out to Boston. They moved out to the Worcester area, and they would give anything to get back into this area. But they were drawn to those major metro areas at a very specific time in their lives. And I think the impediment for 90% of those folks to get back into the Berkshires right now is housing. Housing is inextricably connected to workforce, to our economic, development opportunities, to health metrics, to school district improvements, to all of those things. Housing is inextricably bound to all that. And right now, in Berkshire County, we've had a housing crisis for probably about 5 years. And I use that word crisis not like loosely. It has been a really big challenge. A number of our communities did housing needs assessments back in 2019, 2020. And just between a couple of neighboring communities, you saw deficits of 2,000 housing units, right? Like it's a really significant number. And a lot of that comes with aging housing stock. Almost all of our housing was built pre-1930, or the majority of it was built pre.
So that's one aspect of it that's very similar to Vermont. Is the amount of stock prior to 1940 is high, right?
Exactly. And it was built for a population that was much higher. So North Adams, as a case study, was built for about 24,000 people. We have about 12,000 people now. So you have a lot of dispersed infrastructure that's got deferred maintenance. A lot of blight has occurred. A lot of teardowns have had to happen. But also a lot of buildings were converted into other things, right? They were turned into doctor's offices or legal counsel offices and things like that. So that's one big challenge we face. Another thing that we face is we do have a very aging population in Western Massachusetts and the Berkshires. And so you have a lot of these situations where a 3-story colonial, which was, the nest egg, the investment, the thing that you cherish, the thing that you grew a family in and then sent them out into the world from. And as those folks age, those houses become a burden. They become less of an asset, more of a liability, but they're still in them. And they are, maybe taking up the first floor. They're not going even up the stairs to the other floors of the house.
They don't have the inventory to get into either assisted living or 55 plus active. Like that inventory doesn't exist. Townhomes, duplexes, quadplexes with single story living don't exist, right?
So that 3-story colonial that could house a new family that's interested in coming here is not going to be unlocked because we don't have that kind of bridge housing that exists outward that they could enter and still be part of their community, but be in age and place housing that would allow for them to, live in a smaller scale, but in a meaningful way. And so that's a big piece. The other thing that we face out here is that so much, if not pretty much all, code around housing is based on major metro areas. So there's really unfortunate policies. 521 CMR3. If anyone wants to look it up, it's a really exciting policy, which basically says if you spend more than 30% of a building's assessed value on renovations within a 3-year period, everything needs to be brought up to code, current code. So that means electrification to allow for a car charging port. It means fire suppression if it's a multi-unit. It means ADA accessibility, no matter what the cost of that improvement is.
So if you ever wanted to write a law to encourage people to disinvest in their property, especially if it's a scaled property. There it is.
But in Boston, the policy works pretty well because a building in Boston is $1 million. That's a $200,000 home in the Berkshires, right? So, I joke sometimes that a coat of paint could trigger this in Berkshire County, but you'd have to do a pretty significant overhaul on a building to trigger it out there because the cost of those renovations is the same.
So is that to say you would be for things like you're just creating a lot more variation, recognizing that our real estate market isn't a market; it's micro markets, it's neighborhood markets. We have tens of thousands of real estate markets in the United States, right? And we have to kind of take a look at what works for a particular place and the context of that particular time, right? Is that are we on the up and up, and we're trying to build anew here, or are we dealing with excessive value, right? That we can. You just gave a great example of where, in Boston, it plays differently, because of the property values there.
Yeah. And it really is that variance between communities. And we've had some degree of that with, focusing on what economic development looks like in a community. But we have not been able to address that from a housing perspective. There's conversations at the state level around this. We've even written some white papers to hopefully support some guidance on how we could see that. Whether they index it to median home values or whatever to actually make it so that it allows for it. But ultimately, it's a huge impediment. When you talk to developers out here, it is the thing in many cases that locks them out of, participating in a project, whether that's a 3-unit or a 15-unit or more. It's really an impediment when we don't have that ability to have some home rule control over what it looks like, especially in our more rural areas where socioeconomically we just can't absorb. It doesn't pencil out to do those types of developments. And as you know, developers aren't usually in the business of developing as a donation to a community. Like there needs to be some way for that to pencil out long term for them at the very least.
And I've got to imagine, knowing the map down there as I do, this, especially when we're talking about housing. It's hard to please everybody with the same thing, right? I mean, you have cities like Pittsfield, North Adams, you've got really rural hill towns. You've got a little bit in between. You've got very upscale locales, right? Closer to the Pike, just south of the Pike. And yet right next to really a lot of, I'll call it, genteel poverty, right? So you got these towns. I'm thinking about towns I used to travel through, like on the Connecticut, New York border, like New Marlboro, that have, people have been living for decades on fixed incomes down there, but they're living in like 18th century, 6-7 bedroom houses. They're just beautiful and palatial, right? But they can barely keep the lights on. It's like how do you please everybody?
Yeah.
When that's true,
isn't that the ultimate question? I used to be a city councilor, and I would say, like, if 50% of the people are happy and 50% of the people hate me for a decision, that's probably about as good as it gets, right? Like, it's really hard to find like that very fine compromise with pleasing everybody. I do think that, we need to work more at the local scale. We work as a regional organization, right? We are 1Berkshire County, and that's why 1Berkshire is what it is. And that being said, we also aim to work very intimately with our municipal partners, with the businesses in those communities, to help them navigate resources and best practices that they might not even know exist. Because very often, as you know, like when you're a business, you're working in your business and you're not working on it. And so we're trying to help them think about how do they work on their policies and procedures to make it as business friendly, as development friendly as they want it to be. We know not every community is going to have the sophistication, the infrastructure, et cetera, to bring in big developments, nor should they, especially if they want to be authentically rural and keep the bucolic aspects without impeding upon it. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that people aren't being forced out of their communities because of the tax burden that they have to carry because there's only so many people and the things just get more expensive and municipal services are never going to go down in cost. And so all of those things, it's a matter of looking at the big picture, but also working with each of the trees, right? So the forest, the trees, like that whole model is something where we're really in it all the time in one way, shape, or form.
So the Commonwealth says, as of last March, they've got about 441,000 units shy of being able to solve the housing crisis. That's statewide, right? What we've been debating about a lot in Massachusetts is, where that spread should be, right? Mm-hmm. And so in your mind, do you even have, maybe you don't measure it in this way, but I mean, do you have a number that is sort of replacement value, right? This is what we need to keep pace with the people who are trying to get here. But then what does it look like to grow, right? Like thinking more broadly, you know, as all of the assets come together as they are, you know, you've got your ESO there in the Berkshire Innovation Center. You've got all the other economic activity that might be related to that or not that's going on in Pittsfield. You got everything going on in the Adamses. You got everything going on closer to the southern half of the county. I mean, what does like real growth numbers look like for Berkshire County specifically?
Yeah, you know, and I think growth sometimes gets too much credit as being the goal. I do think that there's a degree of sustaining and really looking at how do we create a sustainable ecosystem where folks of all strata are able to thrive in that economy. But I also know that we need housing growth in order to even house the people that are already here.
Well, that's what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah, one of and you know, I guess one of the big challenges that we face, and it's sometimes overlooked when you think about housing, is that there is a enormous and very often necessary focus on affordable housing with a capital A, right? And that is, everybody deserves to be housed, right? Like that should, let's just put that out there, right? Everyone deserves to be housed, or at least be able to find housing that fits their needs. What we end up with when we get a little bit too focused on one end of the spectrum is that we sort of miss the vision of like, there's also these additional rungs to the ladder. And so in Berkshire County in particular, where we've ended up in like North Berkshire and kind of Central County, is a huge gap in the market rate housing. So what ends up happening is folks that could very easily afford to move up into more quality housing, thus unlocking affordable capital A housing for someone to move up into, are not moving up because there is no place for them to move up into. And that's a really big challenge because there are no incentive programs for market rate housing. It doesn't pencil out very easily unless you figure out how to stack a really interesting, you know, financial stack. And so all of those impediments sort of delay the development and make it take a lot longer in many cases, or stall out entirely. And so it's, you know, it's only those that can really figure out how to put their own capital together in full that are able to pull it off. But that it's hard to share that narrative very often because there is such this critical need for affordable housing. And it's hard to say, well, we actually need more market rate housing because there's two more steps of education to get them to the point of, oh, because people move up in their housing, and then those folks that have been on the shelter for 2 years in some cases can now get into an affordable unit.
And there's siloed messages. If we're having a separate but related message about how all the young people who could be, you know, we've got new tech companies that have, you know, they just have spots unseated, right? Because we just, and you know, it's because we have that educated workforce, but they have to leave because they can't find good market rate housing. Right. Then we get the calls from people say, well, how come we can't help with the financing of that? Well, remember that conversation we just had 10 minutes ago about how like it's market rate, man. It's market rate. Why can't people just make it happen? Right. So they can't be siloed anymore in the context of what kinds of things do we in fact use public money for, or what are the other tools, right? What are the other mechanisms, in fact, that we could bring to bear that would actually spark, you know, more? I mean, if we could build suburbia at the rate we did in less than a generation, really, you know, right after the war, like, couldn't we just do that again? It doesn't have to look the same way. The funding mechanisms don't have to look exactly the same way, but it's just, you know, when you're talking about states that need, you know, Vermont needs 75,000 units of housing just to keep pace. Massachusetts is indicating it needs 441,000 units of housing just to keep pace.
Yeah.
Like, these are big numbers, right? And all the states have this similar thing. Like, you know, it's an all hands on deck kind of a scenario. We could do.
And the rate of actual development is also slowed by a gap in tradesmen. Right?
Oh, so I was going to ask you, what is the trade? What do the trades look like there? Because I feel that that's probably very similar to what we experience just north of the border as well, which is our labor workforce is not set up right now to handle the capacity that we need. Where at the same time, ironically enough, we lose tradesmen in Vermont because they can't find housing.
Oh, interesting.
So like, How about we build a house
Yeah.
and for the tradespeople first? Because it's all these professional class wage people that can't find a place to live and leave because they go wherever they can find a place.
Yeah. And they end up going to those areas where there's a big development boom just the same, and they can find housing.
Right.
I think, and this isn't even just with the Berkshires, I would probably say for most of Western Mass and even maybe most of Mass at this point, there is a big shortage of trades folks. And a lot of that has to do with, there was a whole era where, educationally, we really did drive folks away from the trades, right? It was almost like those were looked down upon as a career path. In reality, it's a very quality career path, and we know that as a fact. And even in, that culture is still not fully healed. And so even folks that are going through our trade schools are very often then going on to a 4-year college. They're not going.
I was just going to say, so I agree with you, what you're saying, but how much of it is also we're victims of our own success? I lived in Massachusetts in the years that Charlie Baker it was the Baker administration where they introduced creating a lot more value, let's say. That's how they used to characterize it in the vocational schools. With the end result being they became so exclusive that it's mostly kids that are on their way to a 4-year engineering degree that ended up the ones that got into the limited places in the vocational schools. I'm not saying they didn't deserve to go there. I'm simply saying if we in fact then had people that wanted specifically to be a tradesperson after graduation of high school,
Mhm.
and they couldn't find a spot in a voc school close to where they lived, isn't that a failure of the system?
It's not achieving.
How much of that was a contributor, I guess, I'm looking for your opinion on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a huge contributor because we haven't been able to refill those roles of folks that are aging out, right? You have the retiring population, and there's also the whole apprentice program. That model is also one where it relies on an existing workforce to train the next workforce. I don't remember which trades it is, but some of the trades only allow each, fully done up, ready to go, someone who's been working in the field for a duration of time to have an apprentice. They're only allowed to have one apprentice at a time. And so it's like a 1-for-1 deal for a duration. And if you don't have enough people that have the experience, that are fully vested and have all those certifications and licensures in place, there's not going to be anybody to train the next generation, legally speaking, right? Like that's a really big issue that we're like that kind of generational cliff that we're starting to get towards, where that gray tsunami or whatever phrase you want to use for it. And so that's definitely like we sort of shot ourselves in the foot for a while, and it may have been long enough to really create a big challenge going forward. Because even if every student in a VOTEC program were to immediately go into an apprenticeship or try to get into an apprenticeship program, we would still be trying to catch up because they still have to develop skills, and it takes a few years.
That's a tough one. I mean, do we fit that? Can that be fixed with more money, or is it really other ways that how do you fix to me, it doesn't seem like it's a question of money. It's a question of you lose oral traditions, and the hardest thing is to get it back. But nonetheless, we still have to find a way to do that. But it boils down to people. I mean, I don't think that we have to export the talent to come and train. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and I think it's people. I think, one thing that the Berkshires has lacked at scale anyway, is we haven't really had an immigrant workforce for a very long time. And that's something where if you look at major like metro areas where they have a lot of construction going on, there's a huge influx or participation of immigrants in those projects and those programs. And they are really driving the infrastructure of America in so many ways. And we haven't had that. And that, is something where like our hospitality industry hasn't benefited from that for the most part. So, 1, 2 or 2 here and there, but for the most part, they haven't. Our construction industry hasn't benefited from that. And so when we're so reliant on homegrown and home retained, even, that certainly is a challenge. But yeah, I do think that the narrative piece is really key. And so it's, yes, money's part of it, but I also think changing how we talk about those fields in a collective manner, where if everyone's on board to say like, you should be a plumber because you get to graduate from tech school and immediately be making $60,000 a year right out the gate as a journeyman, like you should be a plumber, right? Like that is a lifestyle that will suit you, because we will always need plumbers. We will always need electricians. We will always need carpenters. Like there's only so many things that AI can do, and those are not things that AI is going to be doing for us anytime soon. So like those are really skill sets that are vitally important to the world in general, and can be really powerful and meaningful career paths for folks that so often have looked down on those potential opportunities as not being enough. And it really, like, if I could go back in time, I think I would probably have gone to the VOTEC program at the community college near me and gone into that sector, because there's such a huge opportunity.
Yeah, it's that, and it's 21st century manufacturing, right?
Yeah.
Where you've got jobs that start at very, very attractive wages, but the wages aren't the issue. No matter how high the wages that are offered, and training and so forth, culturally, if you've got people that just simply are not interested in that in the first place, because they hear manufacturing and they think ick. They're not thinking robotics, they're not thinking CAD driven design, they're not thinking space age materials or product manufacturing. And that your problem is a cultural one there.
Yeah.
Time is really the only thing that you have to overcome. You really have to overcome the time it takes to educate people on that perspective that, no, this is extremely valuable work. It's attractive work, all that kind of stuff.
It's educational, it's marketing and branding. There is something there where, like, I think if the work were put into the marketing and branding of those opportunities in a more dynamic way, that they were posted as being just as attractive as becoming an influencer on Instagram, right? Like if we were, equally promoting those as exciting opportunities in the world, I think we would see a seismic shift in how people approach the trade.
Oh, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that empty feeling you feel when, I know I got work that's paying me well, but there's just something missing. That something missing is that tangible service or product delivered directly to another human being that makes you feel like, man, my day was well spent.
Instant gratification.
It's that part of it that you need. We all need it, whether we can express that specifically or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the value in the craft of what it is that you do.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Ben. There's so many other aspects that we can talk about just within housing alone if we really want to. But all good conversations must come to an end. We need to leave people wanting more. So if people do want to get more information about the wonderful region of the Berkshires and Berkshire County, how do they do that from you?
So the easiest way, head to 1Berkshire.com. That's the number 1, and then Berkshire.com. And you can find anything you could ever really want on our website there, which is very much so kind of our business to business entrepreneurial mindset sort of platform. And we also run Berkshires.org, which is very much so if you're interested in visiting the Berkshires, learning about our culture, our outdoor recreation, all the amenities that we have to offer for a short stay, a long stay, or a forever stay. Those are the 2 platforms that we operate as an organization. And we're always happy to meet with anybody that wants to make a friend, because we truly believe in making a friend before you need a friend.
Awesome. Ben Lamb, Vice President of 1Berkshire. It's been a pleasure having you here on the Are We Here Yet podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Great to chat.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.